Others.
Okay, no problem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Torat b'finu u'fi amcha beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzei amcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodea shemecha v'lemdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai lemei Torah le'emu Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notena Torah.
Amen. Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Adonai, God, sweeten the words of your Torah in the mouth and in the mouth of your people, the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us, know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed art you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Israel. Amen. Blessed art you, Adonai, God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed art you, Adonai, giver of the Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen.
So what I wanted to just let you guys know is the Yortzeit of Bernard Friedman, which is Nicholas Friedman's father, and is Dov Shaul ben Yaakov. Okay, and I just want to tell you, some of you a little bit about him if you don't know. He was an amazing guy. He was actually an attorney, and most attorneys, they do these. They only ever work if they're going to earn a fortune of money and charge big fees. But Nick's father had an amazing heart, and what happened is he took on a lot of cases, either pro bono or where somebody really couldn't afford the full legal fees would mitigate a lot of his fees just to make sure that the person had a wonderful sort of legal representation. And he was, Hugh Reichland described him as old school, meaning he would obviously deal with the law with integrity as an attorney. He wouldn't play games or shenanigans, etc. But a lot of people that couldn't ordinarily afford a good defense, he would just do the best he could based on their financial situation. And his primary goal was to make sure that they got justice. And you can say that about very, very few people.
Yeah.
So he was an incredible person.
Sounds very special.
Yeah, no, he was an incredible person. And in fact, there was, I was chatting to Nick. He actually had, funny enough, on his on his tombstone, basically it says, it's actually in Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, chapter 4, verse 17. Rabbi Shimon says there are three crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship, but the crown of a good name surpasses them all. So Nick Friedman's dad actually had that on his tombstone, and I think it really represents a lot of who he is. So we're going to do the learning on his behalf, and we're also going to do the learning on behalf of Margaret Kaplan's sister, who passed away from the coronavirus. Now, we've been davening with the mother's name because up until this point she was well. And we're going to daven for the aliyah of Ruth bat Shmuel Raphael. Margaret, I just want to wish you long life, I'm sure, from all of us. I mean, Michael Kukovitz knows Jeff and Margaret very well, I think most of all. And to lose a sibling, no matter how old you are, is a very traumatic affair, especially since it's unexpected. And as we said, this coronavirus was a bit of a shock, because generally it seems almost a cognitive dissonance because we read all these memes. But unfortunately, living in New York, there's been a lot of tragedies within the Jewish community. So I just want to read two particular parts of Pirkei Avot for the both of them, and then it's just going to deal with that, and then we're going to start the Gemara shir. Okay. So before we get to that, there's a Pirkei Avot in chapter 6 that talks about Torah is even greater than priesthood or royalty. For royalty is acquired along with 30 prerogatives, and the priesthood with 24 gifts or prerogatives, and the Torah is acquired by means of 48 qualities. Now, when it turns around and says that a good name surpasses them all, in chapter 4, verse 17, Rabbi Shimon says there are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship, but the crown of a good name surpasses them all. What you can do here is actually have a Bava Kamma, that if priesthood, Torah, and kingship are this great, and the good name surpasses them all, it means that this is achievable by all people if they're committed to Hashem. And the reason I'm saying this is because certain things are of birth. As Gavin knows, Gavin Stoll is a Cohen, so is Nick Friedman. That's of birth. If you a Malchut in terms of kingship, that's birth. And in terms of Torah, that is acquired through effort. But at the end of the day, unless your midos change you, you're not reaching your potential in any way, shape, or form. So what I just want to do is just discuss an idea from the Maharal, which actually was brought about by Chief Rabbi, the Chief Rabbi Warren Goldstein many years ago. The reason why he brings the Maharal is because he went to Yeshiva Gedola. And I don't know if you know, but the late Rabbi Goldfein was an expert in terms of the Maharal. Many times when he gave Al-Chayvim his Parsha Shir, he brought a lot of detail with what it means. So just want to touch on a couple of ideas, and then we've completed the Mishnayot. One of the ideas is that there was an extremely wealthy guy. I'm sure most of you have heard the story, that wrote 2 wills to his children. The first will was that he be buried with his socks on, and then he wrote a will that would be in effect 30 days later. So no matter how hard his children tried to get him to be buried with his socks on, the Chevra Kadisha refused. They said it can't be done. So eventually he was buried without his socks. And after the 30 days of mourning had passed, they opened a second will in which the deceased, he basically said to his children, listen, I've made tens of millions of dollars, and still the Chevra Kadisha would not bury me with my socks on. And I want you to know that you can have all the money in the world, and you can't even take your socks when you die. The only thing that you can take with you when you die is your good deeds, your actions, your mindset, and the fact that you've got a good name. If you haven't developed a good name with others, in essence, what's it worth? And it's known as a Shem Tov, a good name. And, there was elsewhere, it's mentioned, obviously, in Pikei Avot, that the omnipresent, if your people are happy with you, then the omnipresent is happy with you. If you do all the mitzvahs in the world, and at the end of the day, the omnipresent is not happy with you, it's because people are not happy with you. So your reputation counts. And if any of you have made money and lost it and made it again, I mean, it happened to me when I was in my early 30s. I lost all my money, my late 20s, early 30s, and I had to make it again. But if my reputation was bad, there was no ways that certain people would have extended trust and credit. So a good name, I can tell you, is better than even credit, because it's the trust people have of you that can cause you to develop. I mean, if you look at the integrity of kedusha, of relationships, it's trust between a husband and wife. So a good name is everything. The one thing that the Maharal brings that you have to bear in mind is the concept of the crown. So we learn that in the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark, the Shulchan, the table of the showbreads, and the Mizbeach, the golden altar for incense, these all had golden rims. The only part that never had golden rims was the menorah. And this is equated to, obviously, a good name, because the menorah is actually the essence of temple service that obviously even superseded what we do in the temple. So the Maharal brings an interesting concept that what makes up a good name are 3 parts. He says the physical body, the emotions, and the intellect. So what the Maharal says is that we think that we are ruled by our intellect, but he said, in fact, we're ruled by our emotions. And when you look at the word kingship, kingship is aligned to the emotions of a person because that actually rules a person. And the intellect is the justification that a person uses to fuel their emotions. In other words, you can come up with all sorts of reasons, but your heart dictates you. And then he talks about the physical body being the priesthood, because obviously there were certain mitzvahs that the priests were able to do, like enter the Holy of Holies with their physical body, etc. And the intellect, the intellect is your Torah, is the crown of Torah. So what he said is basically that an integration of all three, which is a Shem Tov, a good name, means that you have to have intellectual control of your emotions, and the physical body means you have to elevate the physical in terms of the mitzvot. There's certain mitzvot that are given to elevate the body, such as from certain aveiras and certain positive mitzvahs, certain emotions. For example, when one davens, the intent and integrity of the davening, and the intellect is getting an appreciation of Hashem and the way Hashem created the world, Hashem's rationale, his ability to convey to us his intention. And only the integration of all three parts results in a Shem Tov, a good name. And I just want to thank you all for your well wishes. And we're going to start with the Gemara Shir. I think what we're going to do now is just end off on one particular note that the Maharal brings, is that he brings Rabbi Levi, who turns around and said that when a person dies, generally it's a sign of mourning, because we've lost that person, and it's our loss of the person that makes us feel this tragic loss. But he said, in a certain sense, when we celebrate a birth, it's actually not as much a time of celebration as a time where we need to daven that the person's road is going to be correct. Let me tell you what he's basically saying. He said that when a ship goes off to sea, you don't celebrate at the point where the ship goes off to sea, because the ship could sink at sea, it could get lost, it could not fulfill its duty in terms of taking cargo and goods. And when the ship comes back successfully, having achieved its purpose, it's at that point that you should celebrate the safe return of the ship. So too, when somebody dies and passes away, it is at that point that they've achieved a life well lived and good name and good deeds, etc. And the Radvaz also said that obviously, although you don't celebrate it because it would be cruel to celebrate somebody's passing, what you should celebrate is the fact that they've achieved a lot in their lives, and we can see that they've ended off on a very, very positive note, being close to Hashem. One just thing I want to say about Margaret's sister is Margaret has over the years said to me how generous her sister is, that her sister would give away her last penny to help somebody that needed something. And I can tell you there are a lot of people that I know might be from, but they're not generous of spirit and generous where it contains a sacrifice of self. So I just wish everybody that is either celebrating a Yortzeit or not celebrating, I mean mourning a Yortzeit, or a loss of a loved one, just to remember that they've achieved some very special things, and may Hashem bless them on their journey. Amen. I want to thank you guys. We're going to finish the Zoom share, and then we're going to do the Gemara share in their name. Thanks, guys. Take your medication and measure your sugar. All right, cheers, guys. I'll see you in about 5 minutes. Thanks. Order, Chapter 1, Bava Kamma. We already dealt with the 4 primary damages and the unique features of the ox, the pit, the maveh, and the fire. Now we're going to go into the next section, which is the Mishnah contrasts the various damages with one another. We've learned the unique features, but not in comparison to one another, and not looking for the common characteristics that bind the damages together. So it says the ox is not like the maveh, and the maveh is not like the ox. And neither this nor this, the ox and the maveh, which are living things, are like fire, which is not a living thing. And neither this nor this, the ox, the maveh, and the fire, whose way is to go forth and damage are like the pit whose way is not to go forth and damage. And the Mishnah concludes the characteristics common to all of them is that their way is to damage, and the obligation for watching them is upon you, the owner. I'm just hearing a lot of background noise. And when any of these damages does damage, the owner of the damager is obligated to make payments from the damage, for the damage with the choicest of land. So now we're going to do comparative features of the uniqueness and the common characteristics between the ox, the maveh, the fire, and the pit. And under ox, you've got Shane, Regal, and Keren. I'm hearing a lot of shuffling. Where's it coming from? Gavin, is your mic on? Kevin?
It is, but there shouldn't be any shuffling.
Yeah, I'm hearing shuffling from you. Sorry, man.
If it is me, I'll switch it off.
Yeah. Let's have the mics off unless it's needed. All right, thanks. If you've got questions, by all means, guys, ask. Let me just check this. Fine. All right. So now that this is done, we're on 5A4, and I'm just going to read it very quickly and then give you a little bit of a summary. The Mishnah states the ox is not like the maveh. The Gemara asks, what is the Tana of the Mishnah saying? The Gemara explains, Rav Zavid said in the name of Rava, this is what he is saying. Why was it necessary for the Torah to write both of these damages? Let the merciful one write only one of them, and let the other be derived from that one. The Tana then responds, one damager cannot be derived from another one. Okay? So at this point, it's saying that if we learn that whatever you damage personally or your property damages, you are to make financial payment. On that basis, you can say, well, it damaged, therefore we need to make payment, and you can derive the one from the other. And then basically the Tana's response, that's not the case, because each of the damager has got a unique feature, not apparent in the other damager. And you could say on that basis, in terms of your legal defense, this damage has nothing in common with the other damager because of the unique feature. And even if they might have something in common, it's not enough to convict. The reason being is there's a feature that's in common and the feature that is distinguishable, and therefore the one cancels out the other. So the next section of the Mishnah states, and neither this nor this, meaning the ox and the maveh, which are living things, are not like fire, which is not living. So then we're going to go into the comment of Rav Shisha, that's in the name of Rav. But before we do that, let's unpack one particular thing, is that when there's a characteristic in common, and when there's a characteristic that's unique, it's not enough for a conviction, because it's not binding enough logically to say that you're responsible for all these particular things. So now we're going on to 5B1, and it's going to unpack this as follows. So if you take one example, and we're just going to do a quick summary, that, for example, ox in the Mishnah is, let's take Keren. Keren has a unique feature in that its intent is to damage. So you can't compare this, for example, let's just take man. So if you take ox, which is Keren, and maveh, which according to Rav is man, the very fact that it told of man is that man damages when he's sleeping. And I say I broke an object when I'm sleeping, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. You can't convict me saying that you have to pay because of ox, because if we look at the case of Keren and ox, the ox is intention to damage. And when I was sleeping, I unintentionally damaged your stuff. So you can't convict me on that basis. And if I want to say to you, for example, that that's not a particular element, I could also say that ox is my property, and therefore, if we say it the other way around, we say that man damaged on purpose, I could say that a Keren ox, I can't control my property's mindset because it's not part of me. And if the ox is intending to damage, you can't say maveh, whose intent might have been to damage in the case of where it was man's intention, by throwing a stone. Remember, we said if man uses his own force, whether he spits or throws a stone at somebody, you can't use an ox that is intending to damage. Why? Because, for example, according to Rav, if man is intending to damage an ox that's intending to damage, I could say that I didn't intend to damage you. My ox did you damage because it took a disliking to you or whatever, but I didn't intend to damage you. I can't control an ox that has gone crazy. It's my property. It's not that I did you damage. It's that the ox of its own independent thought did damage. So therefore, whether you take ox or man, it's not enough to convict because they've got certain unique characteristics that you cannot derive one logical premise from another. I'm just using this as a particular example. And the same thing with fire or anything. I mean, even if you take a case of Shmuel where Maveh would be shame. The animal's intent for physical gratification is not the same as Keren, where an ox's intent is to do damage. And you can't, on the basis of Keren, assume Shane and Shane Keren. Remember, we learned that before. So what we need is two damages, and looking at the characteristics of at least two damages to be able to derive a commonality between them in order that these two cases in concert serve as a source for the third case of conviction. Now, before we go on, and I'm going to use some of these examples in the Gemara, does this make sense so far in terms of summary? Guys, I'm going to need the marks on.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay. Good. All right. So the marks can go off. We're going to go as quickly as possible. So let's just take a logical case. Okay. So the logic of the common characteristic derivation presently being considered by the Mishnah would be as follows. Take the case of the ox and the maveh together can serve as a source for the case of fire. So let me run through this with you. Let me unpack it. If you should argue that ox, Keren, cannot serve as a source for liability of fire because ox possesses the feature not present in fire. And what's that feature? That the damager has intended to damage. I would respond that the case of Maveh proves that intent to damage is not essential for liability. Because in the case of Maveh, the damager has no malicious intent. Let me give you an example. If you say, according to Rav, that Maveh means man, when man is sleeping, he damages and has no intention to damage, and we say that man is responsible. And we use that in conjunction with ox, where an ox damages and its intent is to damage. We can see the unique feature of intending to damage is not a reason that Keren is responsible for damage, because we're still responsible in the case of us sleeping where we cause damage. So therefore, you can convict on fire because there can't be an excuse for fire saying, well, there was no intent for arson or it was accidental, because those two common features that we can make somebody pay, the case of fire defense has nothing to say. And if we say, according to Shmuel, which says that Maveh is Shane, we can say that the special feature of Shane is that the animal derives gratification from its actual act. In other words, it's having a bit of a scratch, it's eating something. And if you say, listen, the fire doesn't get physical gratification, or the person that set the fire doesn't get physical gratification from it, I would turn around to you and say, if I use the Shane, which is Maveh according to Shmuel, and in combination of Keren, which is intended to damage, I would say that both features are one's property, whether it's Keren or Shane, and therefore whether the animal derives gratification or its intended to damage is no reason, that's not the basis upon which you convict payment. In other words, it's not the physical gratification that the animal has that creates reason for payment. Because what I'm saying is with Shane, the animal intends to damage. I could say if I use Shane in combination of Keren, the animal there is intention to damage and Shane's intention to get gratification. So using those two features, I can say it's not the unique feature that causes us to have to pay on one's property damage. It's the fact that they both cause damage. And on that basis, if my property or my creation, my fire causes damage, and it proves in the two other cases my property causes damage, and each one has a unique feature, it's the common feature that causes me to say to you, you are responsible for your fire causing damage. Does that make sense, guys? That's what we're trying to say here.
Yes, but so now you've got...
Yes.
Marco, what were you going to say? Apologies, I was listening.
I'm saying it's not the intention that you're using as a common characteristic, it's the damage that it causes, right?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, if you only use one damager, and you come to me and I say, you can say, on what basis do I have to pay you? And if I list only one of the damages, the Mishnah is saying they're so unique that if you took one damager, you can always have a counter argument and say, my damager doesn't contain that unique feature. And if you turned around and said to me, well, they have something in common, I said, listen, they have something in common and they have something completely different. So if there's something in common and something different, you haven't proved your case. If you take different damages, at least two or maybe more, and you put them together and they say, all of these have a common feature, and on this basis you pay, whatever their unique features, I can't argue with you because my fire, in this case, would share that common feature because you use more than one logical argument of more than one damager to prove your case. And what the Mishnah is trying to say is that one damager alone is not enough to prove the case of another because of the uniqueness. It's the commonness that you can convict on a certain damager. If more than one damager has certain things in common that the third one can be proved would share that common characteristics because you don't have a logical argument to refute it. Any questions?
No, I'm cool.
Guys, are you there?
Yeah.
Marco, if you don't, you can ask me with pleasure.
Cool.
But what I'm asking, guys, is not only do you not have questions, does this make sense to you? It has to make sense. Because I don't want to unpack 4 examples in the Gemara unless the principle of this makes sense. And don't worry, we're not going to unpack them today. Don't worry.
Fine, Dan.
Okay, all right. So even if you want to say that according to Rava, if you remember Shmuel, Rav Yehuda's interpretation of Shmuel was that Maveh meant Shane. And if you look at Rava's interpretation of if you take a look at Rav Yehuda's interpretation of Shmuel, the actual damage of ox was Keren. And if you take a look at Rava's explanation of ox, the actual damage was regal. Do you remember that? Because Shmuel says that Maveh is man. So we said, what do we do with ox, if you remember? And we learned that according to Rav Yehuda, interpretation of Shmuel, ox referred to Keren. And according to Rava, we said that ox refers to regal. And then we said we're going to go with Rava's interpretation of Shmuel because if you remember, Keren comes to teach half damages, whereas regal teaches full damages. And so according to this Mishnah, the primary constructs are full damages because we said let it mention Keren outright and not a hint to it. Do you remember that? So whether you'd use a combination of Keren, regal, Shane, pit, man, or fire, they've all got unique features. And what the Gemara is going to come to do next time is prove that it's very, very difficult to use a case of 2 in certain cases unless you use pit. Let me give you an example, and then we're done for the day. If I say to you, let me use Maveh and ox to bring you culpability for fire, I could say that Maveh and ox, whether referring to Maveh being a man, according to Rav, or the anatomy of a living tooth, a living creature with being a tooth, according to Shmuel, these are both living things. And in terms of living things, we could say a living thing has its own sort of intentions and desires, which is not in common with fire. So that's why the Mishnah says if you just take sometimes even two, which is the ox and the mave, it might not be enough to convict in the case of fire, because there's a unique feature that both of them present that you could use in an argument to defend yourself against fire, even though the two have something in common. So what the four examples are going to unpack is that when you use the example of pit and any one of the other individual damages, meaning Keren, Shane, and Regel, or man, or fire, you can convict based on those common features. But pit has to be an essential element, and we're going to see one. In next section. Guys, I want to thank you. I hope it makes sense what we've done so far, and we're going to unpack the four examples on conviction of a common feature as opposed to it being cancelled out by the unique feature. I didn't want to keep the session too long. I just wanted to keep it the length of a normal Zoom Gemara session. That's why we're not going any further. Are you okay to end now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.
Yeah,
Right.
Perfect. Thanks, Damon. Perfect. Very clear.
Thanks, guys. Sorry, I got to work, and I'm sure you all do. Have a lovely day, guys.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Yeah, well done. Thank you. It was a lovely session.